Eric, what's up, man?
Brother, I'm happy to be here. It's been a full day of front row dad adventures.
Yeah, dude, you just came from launching a band and perfect timing to get into this conversation. I want to start with how has the band program, which in other organizations that you've been a part of has gone by different names, but what we're talking about are small groups of men, small groups of people getting together to support one another, to challenge each other, to grow in a small, in our case, 4 to 8 person group we call bands. So the big question is, and let's just dive into the deep end, how have bands changed your life?
Mm, how haven't they? Um, Truly, and I mean that. I've been in bands for the better part of a decade, nearly a decade now, and there's not a place that it hasn't touched. What I found very quickly was society isn't designed currently, and I think it's flawed. We can get into that and more esoteric matters later, but it's not designed normally to step in as a wounded, hurt, challenged person, which we all go through that. We all have moments where we're wounded, we're hurt, we're frustrated, we're challenged, we're overwhelmed. Society is generally creating spaces for those people, all of us, that are judgmental, that are full of advice that doesn't have the whole picture. Whereas bands are so clearly dictated to have no judgment, to never offer advice, to share experiences only. Um, the influence that has when you step into a group of men that you can trust, that you know that they're going to keep all of your information confidential, that you know that whatever problem you're going through, they've probably been through a similar one, and they're going to share with you not what you should do, but what they've done and what the result was. Uh, Completely shifts how you look at problems. It completely shifts how you communicate with your own family, with your own teams. They call it gestalt thinking, where you take in all the information you can, you ask really good questions, and then you share with experiences instead of telling people what they should do.
Where does
And
that come from, by the way, Gestalt?
man, I don't know. My understanding of it, EO calls it a nonsense word. I don't know if it's true or not. But when I first learned Gestalt, it was with EO, and EO was incredible. And my forum there was there with me as my marriage fell apart and was rebuilt, as my business imploded with people stealing and IRS issues and all of these challenges. When COVID hit, I remember sitting down and I was so overwhelmed. We lost around $600,000 in the first 6 weeks. And, for some people, that's not a lot of money. To me, it was a lot. And I'm sitting down and I'm turning to the person next to me and I share my story. And they're like, man, Eric, I feel you. We're down 60 million. And I was like getting kicked in the gut. It was just like, oh my God, what a great reflection to recognize that what I think is this huge mountain that I have to summit and that I need to have, I don't know what to do. I'm freaking out, right? As it doesn't happen often, but it does happen. The deep perspective of someone sitting next to me, not trying to one up me, but going, oh, buddy, I feel you. That's really hard. It's what I hope I can do for my kids, when they have what they feel like is a mountain of a challenge, whether it's a math problem or a issue with friends at school or a sibling. It's how do I give them perspective of I see you, I'm with you, and you're not alone. So to answer the question, how has it affected my life to be in bands? I directly credit bands with saving my marriage. I directly credit bands with saving my businesses multiple times over because I had the team of brothers around me that I could pour into and say, here's everything that's wrong. And they could pour back into me with their life experience, not tell me what to do.
Brent, let me kick it to you, man, and ask the same question. How has your band changed your life?
Yeah, it's become one of the most important things, if not the most important thing in my emotional intelligence growth, in my mental wellness, even though I've worked on my physical wellness and my intellect, something I've hung my hat on from a business standpoint. It's what's helped me more than anything. And just to riff on what Eric said for a minute before I talk about some of my own experiences and stories, is that it's not only this place to share with other men. who can say, hey, I hear you, I see you, I don't know exactly what you're going through, but darn, it sounds close to these other things I've experienced. It's also a place to talk about what those experiences feel like. Like maybe your kid's acting in a certain way and you feel like you hate your kid and you're embarrassed for that feeling. Or maybe your wife, is responding to you in a certain way and it's making you feel like less of a man. And to be able to express these emotions that are coming through, which men aren't great at, and society doesn't give us a lot of places to do this. So beyond just the actual like surface level or 3D reality experiences, like what is it evoking in us? What is happening internally? Because those are the pieces that when we keep that bottled up, even if we tell a story, if we don't share like what it's doing to us on the inside, which is it's hard to share with other men, especially, that's where our mental health deteriorates so rapidly. And we can't get out of these like loops, right? And so the power of the bands for me is not only what Eric said. In fact, that's the core to it, but it's also being able to say, man, I know you've maybe had the same experience. You didn't seem to go into the depth of hell with this. Like I am beating myself up. I am punching myself in the chest. I can't even look in the mirror. And to have some other men say, man, I felt that way before, or I get it. Or you now have given them permission to share their story. And this is where advice doesn't mean anything, because when you start to hear that you're not alone, you're not on an island, you're not some weirdo. We are all experiencing these crazy, deep, hurtful things. And just by letting them out, it's just like popping that air bubble. Instead of building like a geyser, like Old Faithful, where it's just building and building, it just burps every now and then. And if bands are like this way to like burp our little challenges.
What never heard it described that way. What about the argument where somebody would say, dude, I don't want to join a group where everybody just sits around and talks about their feelings and pats each other on the back and says, hey man, it's okay. We've all felt that way. You're like, I got shit to do. Like, give me this solution. I want to solve this problem. I actually need somebody to be like, suck it up, get going. Like I need some, how do you respond to that idea? Is that what bands are? A bunch of people sitting around crying and telling each other it's going to be okay, or they know how they know how the other one feels? Blech. Get it out.
Actually, we hold hands, sing songs, hum sometimes, and then no. I get it, and it can feel that way on the surface until you do it, and this is what is missing in today's healthy masculinity. Masculinity is not about being some badass, rock hard, stubborn, whatever. It's about being grounded. I look at this
as that?
What?
Like, can masculinity be that also? When you say it's not about that, is that a stand against that, or is it a stand with that?
For me, it's a stand against it. And what I mean by that is, if you're out in a bay and you might see a floating marker out there in the ocean, right? And it's tethered to the ground. If it was on a straight piece of hard wire, right? As the waves come, it'd be steady, it'd be rock solid, but it'd be going under the water and above the water and under the water, because the water would be going over and above it, and it'd be a nightmare. And I believe as a healthy masculine, we're tethered to a chain that can move with it. So as the waves move, we move with it, and we're staying in the same place, and we can handle it from all those different angles in a healthy way, versus just flexing our muscles, being firm, being hard on the out, being this just hardness that doesn't allow anything else through, not being able to move around, not being flexible at all.
Yeah.
And so showing up in these bands,
I think a big part of that too is that for so many of us, we have been trained by society, we've been trained by our fathers that our strength is all we have to bring to bear, right? I mean, what is the natural function of man's emotions, right? We are basically told that you can be angry or you can be happy and nothing else, right? Those are the emotions that have been hardwired into us, at least for me, by my father, right? And so learning to have more range in a space that is contained by other men, it's a great place. I look at the bands as the perfect place to practice. It's a place where I go to practice being the best version of me I can be, right? We don't get it right off the rip. And some of the tools that I want to use in my marriage or I want to use in my own life to practice with other men is so much more powerful because I know that I'm safe. John, you and I talked about this, like when I'm learning to dance and I find myself with the male dance instructor, all of a sudden, all of those insecurities of like dancing with the girl and she's pretty and I hope that I'm doing it right, I don't want to step on her feet, they disappear because it's just a dude who knows how to dance really well and can show me how I'm supposed to act, show me how I'm supposed to feel, show me how to lead in a way that's really powerful. I think that there's a gift of men's work is the fact that men are designed to come together in groups and move toward a greater goal.
Yeah, I agree with that for sure. And Brent, the only thing I would add to what you were saying is that I think it's, for me, it's a yes and. Like, I think there's actually times when I would want what I would call this like rock hard exterior. At times I want to tap that. At times I want, because that, to me, what I hear with that, and I think we're just talking about how we define terms, but we're actually doing right now what we probably do in bands, right? Which is somebody speaks their mind and then somebody else can say, yes, and like, I also see it this way. And how I see it is there are times when I want to be rigid in my approach, like unshakable in my foundation. And the words that would be used to describe that are immovable, like with certain boundaries, as an example. And there are other areas of my life when I want to be more fluid and flexible and flowing, and softer, what I get that what you're saying. So it doesn't appear that I'm just being argumentative to an idea or wanting to like prove my point, is that I think I get what you're saying, Brent, which is that for a lot of men, and I've seen this, they've overdeveloped the muscle of being rigid. And so now there's like a little bit of a stance against that to help solid men, talented men, hardworking men, driven men, to soften a little bit, to become a little more vulnerable, a little more open, a little less guarded, a little less in the battle, in the war, as you've articulated, like being able to put the armor down, put the sword down, put the shield down, and just have a dialogue with other men that aren't trying to take your kingdom. They're not trying to steal your bride. They're not trying to like take the pride. They're not trying to do that, because the animal kingdom in its very nature is fucking savage, right? I was watching this show with Tiger the other day, and it's like, well, this lion will eat the other lion cubs because then he can mate with the female lion. And I'm like, holy shit, the world is savage, like, so I get it, where if a man grew up in an unhealthy masculinity where one man's coming in trying to dominate the kingdom and with force and, with force, take it all for himself. If that's what we've been exposed to in a way, then we do need something to counteract that. And I think that that's a healthy thing, to bring a level of trust amongst some men that have become so hardened that they don't even feel anymore their emotions, their body.
Yeah, I realize this conversation is not about masculinity directly. And it seems prevalent in society where we talk about toxic masculinity. And I believe it's a misnomer. I believe it's actually unhealthy to say that, because there's not such a thing in my book as toxic masculinity or femininity. There's just the unhealthy expression of either of them, or the healthy expression of them. And bands specifically address this issue of over hardening that we are primed with in our youth, most men anyways. And let's just get to this place where, at least this is my truth. If the best gift the masculine has to offer the world and or the feminine is this centeredness, this groundedness, this consistency. In my life, and bands have taught me this, it's not about, like, rigidity destroys that, or has in my life. I'll share a story where, as I went through a divorce 3 years ago after 18 years of marriage, my older daughter, who I thought was all game and knew it was going to happen, I ended up hurting her. She ended up getting hurt the most in this separation and divorce. And it took us almost 2 years before we started to really step into repair. And just recently, we were on a family vacation together, and we got into conversation, and it was almost 3.5 hours of her sharing her side of the story, sharing her hurt, putting a lot of blame on me, telling me where I was wrong. You know, there was some blame, there was some victimhood on her end. And because of my band and the work I did within it, I was able to sit there and not have to tell my side of the story or explain myself or justify or respond. I felt like the healthiest version of me I could bring to the table was just to be so grounded, be so comfortable in who I am, having let go, right, and surrendered, was just to show up and listen. And that's what I talk about, is this practice within bands that speaks to the healthy masculine, is being grounded and comfortable and confident in such a way that, for me, I look at it as the opposite of rigid, because my groundedness is where I'm firm, and everything else is the opposite of rigid, in terms of, because I'm so rooted down below. So call that, maybe I pushed that rigidity down through my feet and became non-rigid everywhere else.
Yeah, makes sense.
You know, it's interesting too. You brought up something I thought was really fascinating, is the concept of how we were raised having so much influence on how we show up as men today, and what the expectation is on us. I've spent the last 5 years kind of going through traumatic brain injury, forgot most of my childhood, all these things, right? But I have memories, core memories, and one that hurts, that, like, I'll never forget. And my father did his very best. He didn't have the tools that I've been so blessed with because of bands, because of all these other things that we've done. But I will never forget him chanting at me, "You'll be a man before your mother, son. Suck it up. You'll be a man before your mother." Just this mocking tone of, you're not man enough. Dude, I got hurt, right? You know, kids get hurt and they cry. It happens. I cry more now. Don't worry. But
he's saying you'll be a man in front of your mother?
No, like, be a man, you know, basically saying you're not enough of a man right now. Your mom's more of a man than you. So you should suck it up so that your mom's not more of a man than you.
Yeah. Yeah.
And what's happened in my life over this past decade of bands, this past new lifetime, is this reinvention of understanding what manhood's meant to be for me, how I'm supposed to show up as a man, how I can bring my passion, I can bring my exuberance for life, but with a rootedness and a perspective that's not available anywhere else, because nowhere else are people taking off all their masks and being honest with what's really going on with them. Nowhere else are people actually sharing the depths of their despair or their shame or their natural instincts or their depraved sex lives or whatever else it might be. This is the place where I get to see other men really living life. And I came into band about 4 months ago beside myself. My 9-year-old daughter, I've learned to hold space for my wife, right? She gets triggered. I am like Lake Placid, man. I'm chill. I'm locked in. I am right there with her. I can hold her emotions. I'm not going to get triggered. I might get triggered one out of 100 times, right? But I'm not going to get triggered most of the time. My daughter, it's like, I'm gone. I'm like the worst ever. You think a Russian assassin's bad? I'm worse. All right. And a 9-year-old is triggering me like this. So I came to bed and I'm like, look, this is my biggest issue. This is my one thing right now. I don't know what to do. I don't know what what is within me that's reacting so negatively. It's not like it's a reflection of her things impacting me or any of that. And what came out of it were experience shares from other men sharing their experiences with their kids, their experiences with their parents. I walked away with it not with solutions, but with this deep feeling of being seen and a knowledge, not that I'll do it right away, but that I'll get so much better, that there is a better path forward and that I can figure it out and I'm not alone in this journey.
Yeah, it makes sense. You guys have now seen multiple bands in operation. You've seen some that haven't worked out. What would you say are the ingredients with the bands that are succeeding, that are thriving, and maybe what's missing in the bands in those for those ingredients that, you know, of the bands that are failing, what's missing?
Let the band director talk.
So there's two ingredients that really solidify whether a band's going to make it or not. And the first one is commitment. When you have 6 to 8 men, vast majority very successful in whatever their business endeavors are, also part of this community that has family first. So their free time is spent on themselves or their family. And you ask them to give up 3 hours a month. It doesn't come easily. So the first thing is to be committed, to honor that time for the other men that are showing up in their schedule, being exactly on time, staying the whole time, not checking out, not checking your phone, not being distracted, like fully being there, being committed to the group is number one. And the second thing is taking vulnerability to your edge. We see that there are some guys that are at the early stages of what being vulnerable looks like, barely able to just, crack open their armor. And other guys who are butt naked, running around, spewing everything, right? And everything in between, and it's all perfect. It's just at your edge. And as long as you're willing to take it to your edge, that's all that matters. And those are the two key ingredients. And when we don't do that, it becomes talking about what you did last weekend, the weather, how much money you made last month. It's all surface level shit that you can go. My rule of thumb is, if you can go have a beer with somebody and talk about it, don't bring it to your band.
Right. Yeah. If you could tell your barber, it's not for band. And the concept there that's really beautiful. It is completely up to the individual as to what their edge is. When I started this process, I still had so many thoughts of my own ego, of like, well, I've got to make sure I wear the right shirt to band. I have to make sure I wear the right watch. I have to make sure, like, all these different elements of ego that showed that I was successful and I was smart and I was cunning and I was all these things. And eventually, the more and more vulnerable I got, the more I realized that nothing about the external on me mattered. All that mattered was how I showed up, how I brought my truth. And what's really beautiful about these bands, because now we've launched dozens, we've seen and witnessed these men come through training and share their truth. And oftentimes it's just a couple of questions away to get really deep, to go from, oh, I have this frustration with my wife, which we all do. Okay, that's a real thing, to, oh, I'm afraid that I'm going to push my family away. Oh, I'm afraid that I'm not enough because blank, right? And it's just incredible how a couple of men listening intently and being present to hear someone's challenge can ask the right question to completely crack open someone's soul and what they're really feeling. And then they can start doing the work on that.
When bands fail, is it just the opposite of what you guys shared, or is it something else?
Brent's thinking.
It's slightly nuanced, but for the most part, it's almost a direct correlation. For whatever reason, guys get nervous, they let fear overcome them, and they stop prioritizing. And then there's a lot of excuses about why. I got busy, this happened, season of life, and all that could be true, and it also can just be a story. So lack of prioritization means don't start showing up. And when you don't show up, it's impossible to be vulnerable.
Well, and that I think is a big piece of that is even more important, is that there's a commitment, right? You join a band, you sign a constitution, you make an agreement. It's a contract. And let's say there's 6 people in your band. If you don't show up, that's a huge chunk of value missing. And if you have a couple of different people not show up, now you've got 30% of the value, 40% of the value that you could be gaining. The wisdom from the room has been removed. And, we in the band training, we kind of hit this over the head a lot. It's like, look, guys, if this is not for you, no judgment. There's no judgment for this not being right for your season of life. I'll counter that if you think it might not be right for your season of life because you're too busy, or you just had this happen, or you just had that happen, this is probably the time you need a band most. When things are overwhelming is when you need brothers. It's when you need perspective. It's when you need help. And yet some people don't have that commitment level. So we try to really push to help people understand that this is just like a marriage. I mean, it's not quite as messy when the divorce happens, but please come in with commitment, because everyone else in that band is relying on you, just like you're relying on them.
Yeah. John, you recently had Dr. Robert Glover, who wrote No More Mr. Nice Guy. And
because of Eric, he introed us.
And even though there's been a lot of guys in our community who have read that and who've actually implemented it really well in their lives, I see those same men show up when we're forming bands, and they step right back into the nice guy. And everybody's walking on eggshells, and nobody wants to say anything, and we're tiptoeing here and there, and we're being friendly and kind or nice. And it's one of the things that is so important about bands not failing is, how do you be extra kind? And extra kind might look like, I'm going to tell you exactly how it is right now, because the way we hear your phone going off and it's distracting the band, and it's just, you're not honoring this container we've created. Or what you're sharing right now, hey, John, I love you, my friend. And there's a layer behind that. I don't know what it looks like, but go there, because that's where the question really lies. And we're not afraid to, in a loving way, ask these questions, because we all know we stepped into this place, this container, this band meeting exactly for this, to have conversations with other men, other humans that will talk to us in a way where we know they're not trying to hurt us, but they're not going to let us get away with our bullshit.
And I'll say this. I've been in band with Brent for almost 2 years, and it's not always comfortable. It's not. But growth begins at the edge of discomfort, right? When I come into the room and I'm like, man, I'm just really good. Things are great. And Brent goes, what did you text me about last week? Don't bullshit me. I know there's some stuff going on. What's going on with this? Well, no. Last month you were talking about this with your daughter. The month before that, you were talking about this with your business partner. And the month before that, you're talking about this with your CEO. And 3 months ago, you were talking about how it was the worst quarter you've had since 2016. No, don't bullshit me. I know you. I see you. And what's really cool is we have systems in place, because we have this beautiful pillar system that we rank ourselves in every month. So when we have a brother who's been a 1 in the marriage column for 2 years, and all of a sudden he's a 9, I can go, whoa. I see a trend change. Let's talk about your marriage, because sometimes it doesn't come up. It's not the most important thing. But for those of us in the brotherhood, we know how important it is. And we love each other enough to go, yo, let's talk this out.
Yeah.
So it's uncomfortable, and I hate Brent sometimes for it, but it's also been the edge of my growth so much, because he and my other band members, it's not just him. They're all willing to call me out, which is awesome.
Hey, Eric, how are you doing on time, by the way? I know you got another.
I'm good. I got 20.
Thing. Okay. Question on, how important is it to be in a band with guys that are like you? People will go, put me in a band with guys that have kids the same age. Put me in a band with guys that are, in the same business, or have the same level of wealth, or same whatever, right? Been married for the same number of years, so we can relate to each other.
You mean put me in a place where everyone's just like me so we can agree on everything? I think it's the worst idea ever. I genuinely do. Like, I understand the desire to find people who are like you, but guess what? You're in front row dads. You already found people who have 6 different priorities in their life, very similar to yours, the pillars that we all follow. You already found people who are on a personal growth journey. You already found people who are passionate about their families more so than their businesses. The gift of having people at dissimilar points in life is that I can share a story about my 9-year-old daughter, and another member of my band can share a story of their adult daughter at that age and how they were acting. And I can learn from their experience. I can be in a band today with someone who has a very young child, and I can share what might be happening next because I've been there recently, right? I've got 3 kids. And because of this the dissimilarities is actually where the power is. It's where the knowledge is. We're seeing each other. Like I want to, like in our band, there are multiple different religions, right? And I want to have a conversation with the Buddhist and the Christian and the Mormon and understand their philosophy better because I'm present with them and because I now have a new window into the world. But that's just my very passionate response. I think that they should be as dissimilar as possible, please.
Yeah,
Brent,
I mean,
what do you think?
you know, when we look at this piece about advice versus experience shares, which is really difficult for some guys to get in the very beginning, it's impossible to give advice because, you know, at the end of the day, when we are telling ourselves and building our own story about what we experienced in life, we're maybe 75% honest with ourselves. We add color, leave out some things. And when we share something with the world, we leave out that same 25-30% because we want to make sure that it sounds good and it leaves us in a good light and people think okay about us, which means that math shows that at best we're sharing 50% of what really happened in any given situation. I mean, in business, I never made decisions on 50% of the data. Like that will destroy you. It's one of the dumbest things you can do. You know, so giving advice in any sort of personal level it really falls in the same line. So as we look at experience shares, the whole goal of an experience share is to really give permission. You're giving other humans, other men in this case, permission to be okay with what they're feeling, what they're going through, that they're normal. Help normalize it. That's what this permission gives by sharing experiences. And what do you want? Do you want the same, like a whole heaping of vanilla ice cream? Or do you want vanilla and chocolate and strawberry and pistachio and butter pecan and all these things so you can be like, oh shit, I didn't even realize there's all these like possibilities here. Oh, now I can solve my own problem. And that's the real power of bands. You help other guys solve their own issues. That's sticky.
You know, I'm remembering a conversation that I had with a guy. I don't know if either of you know him. His name's Jeff Hoffman, and he has some part to play in the founding of Priceline. I don't remember what part, but some part. And he was at an event, a Front Row Foundation event. We were talking to him about his rise in Priceline, and he said one of the ways that he came up with the idea was he calls it info sponging. So he goes, I'm just curious about the world. I want to read about this and that because what I find is I can connect dots between industries and between all these what are seemingly random facts and about the world. But when I pull them all together, when I have all this info that I'm sponging up, I can create something really amazing. So he had talked about how he had read an article about, airlines not using their unused seats, and then perishable goods. And he kind of started connecting some dots and he came up with Priceline. And I think of this idea as like the benefit of diversity in opinion. Like if you do have people with different religions or who live in different parts of the country, that sometimes they bring a perspective to the table that you don't have or wouldn't have if you're in your own little neighborhood in Austin, Texas, where everybody kind of, if it starts to all feel the same. You speak a similar language, you have the same accent, you have the same, right? The same resources, the same farmer's market you go to, the same. So you got a lot of similarities, but it's not until somebody who lives in a completely different culture who brings a completely different viewpoint. So if the point is curiosity, if the point is expansion, if the point is, the depth, that maybe diversity is your greatest friend in those ways,
Mm-hmm.
So it's really cool to think about, Yeah, it's fun when every time you tell a story, somebody's like, me too. I had the exact same thing. That's fun. That can be really cool. And I think that has a place in your life. Like you
But I'll
should
tell you
have
this, I think
people
that
like that.
more often than not, even in a diverse room, you'd be shocked how often you get that.
Well, yes,
Yeah,
because same with, but yes, because same with spirituality. Like when you look across all religions, you go, oh, everybody kind of lands in the same place. They might call it something different, but they're all kind of landing in a similar. There's so many common threads with people all over the world when they touch their humanity, when they really get in tune with their heart. Like our hearts often resonate very similarly.
mm-hmm.
The sounds we make with our mouths and the lines we make on paper to speak and write are different, but the resonance of it, a lot of it, that's why we can hang out with people from another country and be like, ah, I feel you, because we're sharing humanity.
Absolutely.
Guys, thank you for today. Is there anything you want to say before we go?
I'll go. If you're listening to this and there's a piece of your soul that says, I think having other people in my life would be good for me. If there's a part of you that's lonely, if there's a part of you that feels judged by the circle you're in right now, that feels like you're trying to keep up with the Joneses, that feels like you're racing to try to get your business to some level that's imaginary, that sounds like the right goal. If you don't feel like you've connected well with your spouse or with your kids, if you feel like there's something missing and you're willing to do the work, to commit to other men, to show up for them, and thus they will show up for you, I genuinely believe that bands are probably the most powerful gift and tool that you could possibly have. And yes, it's work. Yes, you got to show up and you got to pour the time in. You got to pour into other people. You have to listen and learn to listen in a way you never listened before, without judgment, without advice. But I truly believe that bands are something that will shift everything in your world. It has for me. I am forever grateful to my band, to this entire journey that I've been on. And the culmination has been the band. So I'm grateful. I hope to see all of you in a band someday. Brent, go.
Yeah, the common thing I hear as I am putting bands together, as I'm training them, as I spend the first 90 days launching them, and it tends to show up towards that 90th day, is there'll be at least one, maybe two guys in each band that's like, man, I was hanging out with my wife last weekend and she's like, I don't know what you guys are doing at Front Row Dads. But you just like, you're showing up different. Like, what's going on? And part of that is Front Row Dads as a whole. And the next level deeper is the bands. And if that's something you desire, you need that to just spark this change in your life. There's no better place to start than getting filled and getting whole in a band with other men doing the same work.
Fellas, thanks for being here today. Thanks for the work that you've done within Front Row Dads to build the band program. It's radically different today than it was a year ago. The level of structure, thoughtfulness, execution, follow through, and ultimately impact is like tenfold, if not, more. So thank you. There's no doubt that you brought a lot of your experience, years of experience prior to this group, being in other communities. And then you brought it, all of who you've developed yourself into, shared it with the guys, listened to the guys, brought their experience into the equation. And what we're coming up with is something very unique to Front Row Dads because it was built within Front Row Dads with the DNA of all the Front Row Dad members. So with you two at the helm. So thank you so much. Appreciate you. Enjoy the rest of your day, fellas. We'll talk soon.
So long.
Thanks, John. Thanks, Eric.